Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the show. Today's guest is Lily Journey. She's a freelance writer and storyteller. On today's episode, you can expect to learn Lily's advice for building writing habits, authors that inspire her, why she thinks people should share their art, how her faith influences her work, what she's learned about herself since writing a Substack, how to get over fear of judgment, and much more. Without further ado, please welcome to the show, Lily Journey. Lily Journey, thanks for coming on the show today.
Thanks for having me.
So, um, you write on a blog. Would blog be an appropriate term? Okay.
Yeah, Substack. Yep.
On a Substack. You write on a Substack called Life Considered. And the bio goes as follows. There are hints of heaven in the ordinary. Life Considered was born as a personal safe haven, a place to write imperfectly, to reject the edit itself, to embrace the grit of the daily. I'm curious, what prompted you to start writing and publishing on Life Considered, and also where did the name come from as well?
Yeah. So I started writing on the Substack probably 2 years ago. I had some friends who just kind of discovered the newsletter format of it, and it really appealed to me. Um, I was really in this period of craving discipline in my writing. I felt a lack of inspiration at every turn. I was in a job that really didn't stimulate my creativity and was just feeling super dry overall. And so I just wanted kind of one cohesive place to land my thoughts. And yeah, it started for me as a daily writing practice. So I started in December. I think I found out about what Substack was the day before I kind of created this challenge for myself to write every single day and also publish every single day. Um, yeah, because I majored in journalism and I heard pretty much in every class from every professor that you should be writing daily and you should have a daily writing practice to keep your creativity up. And I thought, okay, this is a place that I could do that. So I think it really just began with a curiosity of what would come out of me if I committed to really writing every single day, after a long day of work or before work. Um, and I really feel like that's what happened. My goal was to kind of eliminate any conception of an audience or self judgment. I can be very perfectionistic and strive to just editing a lot and kind of a standard that isn't what I wanted. And I wanted creativity to just flow through me. And so I thought, okay, if I have a discipline of doing this daily, then I literally will not have time to edit. I will just let these thoughts come out. Um, and yeah, it was really refreshing. You asked what the name, kind of like what the impetus for that was. I had someone I knew in the past in design school, and they mentioned that design is just looking at life through a different lens. It's just considering
Hmm.
something differently. And I've always had kind of a philosophical, sentimental perspective on life, even since I was a kid. And so I don't know, the idea just came for me to me, of Life Considered, and I just kinda ran with it. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. Where do you think the philosophical, sentimental way of thinking about things came from? Because I feel like at least probably most people wouldn't describe their child self as philosophical and sentimental.
Yeah, that's a great question. I have actually wondered the same. I really think it's just the way that the Lord wired me. Also, kudos to my parents. They were not big fans of TVs or technology growing up, and so they just encouraged me and my siblings to get outside and to be imaginative. I would listen to a lot of books, and I just felt like I had this interior life where I would just ask questions of things. And again, I think that's just kind of a personality kind of attitude about life. But yeah, it's really allowed me to tap into noticing things in a different way. That's been really just fun.
Hmm. Wow, that's really cool. And uh, you talked about daily writing habits. What have you kind of learned, either about what you're writing about or about yourself through daily writing? Has that been like self revelatory at all?
Yeah, it has. I think it's really accomplished the goal, which was to be less judgmental of self. There were certain days, especially in that first month, where I really followed through with writing every single day, where I realized that inspiration is not something that is this moody muse that I have to latch onto at certain times in my life or have the
Mm,
perfect environment for. So I feel like it was successful in that it challenged me to reach deeper in myself and also reflect on memories. Like if I had nothing that inspired me that day to write, I was working in a cubicle that was pretty gray. I had certain just work interactions every day. There wasn't always inspiration that was coming to me. And so it was just encouraging to think, wow, my mind is a place where I can imagine not only like new stories and scenarios, but also reflect on things that have already happened. So I felt like it wasn't hard to write every day.
mm, mm. Oh, that's really cool. And yeah, I do think that a lot of people, at least in the like infant stages of embarking on a creative task, feel like creativity is something that like kind of like you were saying, it kind of like sweeps down and comes upon you and you're like, oh, eureka. And you write for a couple hours and then you're like, I'm out, and you wait 2 weeks and do it again. Was it challenging to force yourself to write even if you didn't uh feel like you had a lot to say? And like how did you get yourself to start even when you were like, I don't know what to write about?
Yeah, yeah, that's a great question. I think writing prompts are super helpful for a lot of people. I did use some of those occasionally, just like a word or phrase from the day that I thought, okay, what do I think about this word? Or, this sentence I heard, even a lyric. Like you can really use anything as a springboard for creativity. I think, yeah, I used to have this conception that creativity was something I needed to control or like wrestle down and figure out how to, manipulate in my own style, but I think that
Mm,
um it comes and it goes, and I definitely have seasons of inspiration, but yeah, I think you really have to know yourself well as a writer to know when you're in a season of a lot of inspiration and just gleaning things from the world, and then when you're in seasons of a little bit more dryness where you just need to start putting words to paper even if no one else sees it.
mm. Yeah, that's really cool. And to talk a little bit more about your writing, I'm going to read another a quote from one of your articles here. But in an honest treatise on the writer's life, you quote David Brooks saying, "The writer's life is one where learning and becoming are all played out in public." Uh, so, can you talk a little bit more about the like public element of your writing? Is it scary to like put it out on the internet where like hypothetically anyone could find it, or did you feel like that, or did it feel like that was an important element to it? And if so, why?
Yeah, yeah. I have always struggled with this conception of writing in public. I think other art forms are more conducive to public display.
Mm.
And I used to be really into photography in high school. And I remember someone making a comment. I had this little silly like photography Instagram account, and I would take graduation
Didn't we
photos.
all?
Yeah, exactly, exactly. But it felt very, very vulnerable for me to share photos where I had kind of a creative environment or was trying to express in a new way and experimenting. And I started just not taking any more photos because I felt
Mm,
like it was too exposing or vulnerable. And looking back, it's so silly to think that. Um, but yeah, I think the public part of writing comes into play when you realize that your art is not about self proclamation or fame, but it's also a way of knowing yourself. And I think, especially as a Christian, you realize that you can't know yourself unless you're in community. And so I think it's really a misconception that writing is a solo activity and something that's only interior or subjective. I think that writing and the artistic life is something that is subjective, yes, but you're talking about objective things creatively. And so I think
mm,
it's important to share that with others because we all have a way of seeing the world and we all have a sense of wonder. And if you only hold that excitement into yourself, I think you're not really challenging yourself to communicate it in a way that other people with different nuanced experiences and different minds would understand. I feel like that's a challenge for me always, in sharing publicly is yes, it's vulnerable, but also understanding that not everyone's brain sounds the same as mine.
Sure,
And
yeah.
in a way that's like true to myself, quote unquote, but also is just objectively sensible.
Yeah. No, that's so interesting. Yeah. Is in what you said about realizing that art isn't about fame, it's about like self-expression. Is that what you said? Is that a close enough approximation?
Yeah, of knowing self. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Um, is that how you would encourage young creatives, like, people who are in high school who are struggling to feel comfortable like sharing their work? Because I was in Bio's film school for a little while, as you know, and it's a pretty common thing for everyone in the film school, not everyone, but a number of people to be like, oh, I love making the films, but I hate premiering them. I hate having to sit in a theater and watch everyone else watch it. So how would you encourage people to kind of get over that fear of judgment of their art?
Yeah, I think a lot of it at first feels like imposter syndrome. I mean, I still struggle with this. I'm sure I will my whole life, but I think the starting is really important. And if that means you need a discipline, like to kind of have a grid for how you start sharing because it is so vulnerable and exposing and uncomfortable, then you can start with something small like a 30-day writing challenge or filming new scenes and then sharing them with people won't necessarily see them in the same way. I think it's really important to do that because you do receive input and you're constantly softened by other people's input, but you also get this kind of tenacity and inner, not callousness, but strength that says, oh, this is my style. I'm developing this style. And
Hmm.
knowing your own style comes through just the discomfort of putting it out there and then noticing how you feel when you do so.
Yeah, yeah. And to talk more about to bring it back to life considered in your writing, you talk yourself in some of your uh what would blog posts? I'm struggling to find a word for that.
Yeah.
Articles, blog posts?
Yeah. Post,
Um,
newsletter. Yeah.
sure. That you've written, you talk about how important it is to be like gritty and raw. And I think that like in a way makes it so memorable, your writing. Has like the rawness come naturally to you, as you've just desired to be uh honest with yourself about yourself, or is that something you had to develop?
Yeah, no, it was definitely something I had to develop, and I think that
Mm,
goes along the lines with the vulnerability we were just talking about. Um, I think those words grit and rawness, really what inspired me to start using language like that was authors like Flannery O'Connor and even Dostoevsky. A lot of his
mm,
characters were just an affront to my sensibilities. They would have this wild range of emotions that I couldn't quite understand, and yet after I read his works, I thought, wow, that is very true of the human experience. And
mm,
he doesn't mince words, and neither does Flannery O'Connor. And I think that um, for me, it really challenged a certain level of humility to know that I don't know everything, but I can take a stab at getting to the most basic essence of a thing, of what I think
mm,
about a thing, of an experience. And I think that affront to a sensibility is something that we experience when we're in daily life. And I began to be really passionate about how to express that through words because words have always been beautiful and powerful to me, but I think they haven't always been honest in the ways that I've desired. A lot of my writing began to just morph into what I knew my audience would enjoy or things that I
mm,
had received a lot of positive feedback about. I began writing in that style. And I think when I went through that season of just feeling like I didn't have a lot of inspiration, it kind of took me back to the drawing board of not necessarily what is my style, but what is the world saying to me and how can I chip away at anything that is not that. Um,
mm,
I heard recently that Michelangelo, when he was creating David, he had this really simple quote, and it went along the lines of, I saw David in this chunk of marble, and all I did was chip away at what wasn't David. And I feel like
Hmm.
in my writing, I'm really curious about that idea because the artistic journey is one that you're constantly chipping away at excess, at things that are not your style, at things that are not really true of what you mean. And yeah, I think that process allows you to see yourself in a more holistic manner. And I found that people have been pretty refreshed by that. But I will say that the more honest and the less words that you use to be honest, the more vulnerable the writing becomes because
Hmm.
you don't get the luxury of explaining things as much. You just have to say exactly what you mean and wait for a response and even wait for misconceptions and miscommunication and people to not understand the essence that you're getting after.
Do you feel like it's important to not explain yourself, to use less words? I'm just curious because I think some people would be like, no, like I could see how this would bother people, and so I would want to like write a full extra paragraph to explain why this isn't, what they think it might be. And do you feel like it's sometimes important to like let go of addressing every caveat?
Absolutely. I think it's a stylistic choice. And I think for me, I am really drawn to poetic kind of styles. And what I love about poetry is different people can read the same poem and have a completely different aftertaste and a
Yeah.
different kind of feeling that they leave with. And I think that really inspired my writing to be a little bit more simplistic. I think there are some things that sound so controversial that you have to kind of explain them.
Sure.
Um, but I think just growing up in the church and in a lot of um, just faith communities, I noticed that writing to me seemed over explanatory and just filled with a lot of redundancy. And it started to frustrate me, and I wrestled with that. I think that's even true in the academic life.
Hmm.
Um, and that's not to say that, all Christian cultural writing is that way, but I think
Hmm.
for me personally, I wanted to um, just get at the heart of things. And again, a lot of my writing parallels faith journeys that I'm currently on. And for me, I was also questioning who Jesus is. And he just affronted me with this question of what is truth that Pilate asks. And so during this season of kind of stripping down my writing, I was also stripping down traditions and ideas that were not gospel oriented. So I think everyone kind of goes through that in different ways. But yeah, some people have a really more verbose style of writing, and I really enjoy that. But it's just, yeah, it's not me personally.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Can you dig more into um what you were saying about like the over explanation that you see in people's writings? Not to like goad you into attacking Christian writers. That's not the goal at all. I'm just very curious about like what you mean by that, and like also why it bugged you.
Yeah, I think as someone who feels much more comfortable communicating via writing, when I read things, there's a certain power in visually seeing words on paper.
Hmm.
And going back to what I was talking about at the very beginning with imagination, I think you can't really coax your readers and your audience to use their imagination if you're describing things in the precise detail that dictates them toward a certain thought life. Every
Hmm.
person has nuanced memories and experiences, and they will read your writing differently than you're intending. I think
Hmm.
there's a miscommunication that happens with all of us because words are symbols at the end of the day. Um, yeah, so I have nothing against yeah, people who are more verbose, but I think that you lose a sense of wonder and imagination that you could be challenging your readers to feel with less words. Because when I read books that I really love and that really stick out to me, a through line that I've noticed with all of these authors that I love is they do leave things up to my imagination. They almost
Hmm.
describe things that they want to capture under a microscope, like things that wouldn't naturally seem important or scenes. And then I feel like I know the character better than if they had described every nuance of the character's backstory or history. And so I kind of take that principle and yeah, I just want people to be curious.
Yeah. Oh, that's really cool. Wow, that's so interesting. I've never heard writing talked about in that way about like the importance of leaving things to the imagination. That's very cool. Can you talk a little bit more about the interplay between what you believe religiously as far as your faith and in writing life considered? Because I imagine that those two would have to have major bearing on one another, but I'm curious what your perspective is on it.
Yeah, yeah. I think my spiritual life and my writing life are complete parallels. I think
Hmm.
it's always kind of a mission of mine to integrate them as closely as possible. Um, yeah, it feels like a spiritual practice to write for me because I do believe that the Lord has allowed me to communicate in a way that just makes more sense to myself and maybe to others through writing. Um, I also think that there's a tendency in all of us to hide. I think that's just central since the Garden of Eden. We want to cover, we want to hide, and we often want to camouflage and appear how other people um, want to perceive us. And
Hmm.
ever since I was a kid, I felt like it was easy for me to identify what others wanted from me and then to adopt that style. And so spiritually, I feel that the Lord has been calling me, especially throughout the last 3 years, to be more uncovered towards Him and to be more open to what He has to say. I remember a really pivotal conversation with my spiritual director, and I was telling her, I really feel like I can hear the Lord more truly when I'm more honest. But I just have this tendency to not want to say exactly what I'm feeling with him because it feels risky. And I feel like I'm more present to him, is what I said when I'm honest. And she just sat there for a second and she said, I think it's not that God is more present to you when you're honest. I think it's that you're more present to what is already happening. And I think
Hmm.
that just gets at the sense that God is always there. He's always honest and he's always uncovering himself before us. But it takes a lot of effort to really ask ourselves what we intend by our words and what we're actually feeling. And so I think that's the spiritual journey that has kind of coincided with my writing. It also helps me understand God through story and through imagination. So I think those are like the major tie-ins to my faith.
Yeah. Oh, that's really cool. Yeah, it seems to me like I don't know what you think about this. Another way to articulate that could be like if God is his ultimate truth, then like by being honest with yourself and with him, you're kind of like aligning yourself more towards him. Uh I don't know how you feel about that, but
Exactly. Yeah, that's such a great way to put it. I do feel like, yeah, you're opening yourself up more to truth by aligning yourself to one who is truth.
hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, cool. Yeah, that's awesome. And it seems this is so interesting. I think I told you this in the email where I reached out to you, but it seems like the decision to be super honest about yourself um like falls into a tradition of Christian writers. Like the most obvious in my mind is Augustine in the Confessions. Um do you do you derive inspiration from those people? Did you kind of like stumble across it and then you were like, "Oh, this is what I'm already doing." Like how do writers like that have an impact on what you're doing in your own writing?
Yeah, definitely confessions is totally integral into my journey in this.
Hmm.
I think also I grew up Orthodox Presbyterian, and so the liturgies of faith were something that I kind of felt like I needed to escape from, and now have had this kind of pathway back to because I find that they speak to universal things that are most true of us. Like we are all fallen, yet we all yearn for salvation. I see that in every story of like every book in Tori that we read, this
Hmm.
great story being revealed. And I think it is very romantic to think of your life as these different segmented chapters and stories that you can
Hmm.
summarize, make sense of, and then move on to the next chapter where you learn another thing or another episode or like another level in the game of life. But I think authors like Augustine remind me that life is it's more like a spiral. Things keep coming back around. You mess up in the same ways, you sin in the same ways, and God never changes. And even your tendency towards the same evils and the same goods can lead you on a journey closer to the Lord. So, yeah, I've definitely been influenced by just the honesty and transparency of writers like Augustine.
Yeah. Oh, that's really cool. Yeah. And we're starting to run out of time, but I have one more question that I'm dying to ask you, so I have to get to it. Okay, I'm just gonna well, you mentioned Tori, and so we have kind of the same educational background. And I suppose for people who aren't listening, it's just a great books program, or people who are listening, it's a great books program where you read a lot of famous books and poems and short stories from across history. But so you have a lot of experience in reading people who really seek to have no stone unturned when it comes to talking about the cosmos and about creation and is there God, and I like Aristotle and Descartes come to mind. um, and I think that there is a virtue to that, and so not to disparage that. But I was also struck by you being willing to say at points in your writing, like, I can't grasp the, I think, profundity, which is a word I didn't know, the profundity of God, and that's okay. How what has it been challenging for you to be able to let go like that with uh and how have you reached a state of like spiritual and emotional calm in letting go and being like, I don't know, and that's okay.
Yeah, I think it does go back to some of those authors and those, thinkers because I think the draw of philosophy is that, I also tend to ask really big questions of life, but I don't feel the burden of figuring out every answer as much as I feel the burden of expressing the questions themselves, and I don't know if that's a
Hmm.
good or bad thing, but yeah, I think for me, something that was so refreshing coming out of reading all of those books is that there truly are multiple ways of knowing things. There are multiple ways of seeing the world. And by that, I don't mean that, truth is subjective or that we create our own reality. I just mean that um, I think of it as kind of the metaphor of having two eyes. Like one eye lets us see things rationally and scientifically, but if we only have one eye, we're kind of having this blurred vision towards the rest of the world. And
Hmm.
then we have this poetic vision that allows us to see the meaning behind things and imagine things differently than we see them scientifically. And when you have both of those eyes open to the world, you're going to get a much more holistic viewpoint of the horizon of your life. And so, I think for me, when I say like delving into the mystery, into the paradoxes of things, that's what I've found after this stripping experience of trying to be as honest as I could in my writing. I found that one, obviously, I don't know every answer to every question that I have, but two, that is kind of an answer in of itself because I'm realizing that the fabric of reality as I see it and the character of God as I know it is something that is a little bit beyond both my rationalistic scientific ability to observe and also my imagination. There are parts of God that we cannot imagine. And I think that's really beautiful. And I think the reason that I use like the word paradox so much in my writing is that I just sense the tensions between those two things in life, and I feel like that is one of the most central truths that I know through my experience.
Yeah. Wow, that's really cool. Okay, thank you so much for sharing. And to wrap it off, since you're a writer and a reader, what would be one or two books that have made a big impact on you that you would be like, somewhat like people should read these before they die?
Yes. Oh my gosh, so many come to mind. Definitely Anna Karenina by
Okay.
Tolstoy. I think the characterization, the thoughts on free will, so beautiful. I love Christina Rossetti. I love her work on poetry. I think for people who don't naturally love poetry, it's just so accessible. And I've also been inspired by her faith journey. So definitely
Hmm.
reading those two authors. And then Confessions for sure by
Okay.
Odyssey. Yeah.
That's awesome. That's a powerful triumvirate. That's awesome. Okay, well, if someone wanted to go find more of your writing, where could they go to do that?
Yeah, Life Considered Substack. That's kind of where I keep a lot of my public writings. I'm also on Instagram, but it's kind of like a more private thing right now. But definitely Substack is where I publish.
Okay. Okay. Perfect. Well, Lily, thank you so much for taking the time to talk today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Tucker.